Bienvenue au café, le café est ouvert. Et, comme toujours, salut. Tessa was a very bulky engine, with a tendency to emit more smoke than was good for the environment. This was ironic because Tessa was the DEFRA engine, a privately owned locomotive controlled by the utility companies. Now, in the old days, before the controllers gave the utilities, the water boards and so on, to their mates, the utilities would process raw sewage before they disposed of it. They charged the customers for this service by way of what were called environmental charges, but most customers were happy to pay because they knew that it was important to keep the rivers and the beaches clean. Now, when the controllers' mates took over, they kept the charges but stopped treating the sewage, and this allowed them to increase their profits and bonuses. They also borrowed lots of money against the company assets. This allowed them to pay even larger dividends to their shareholders and bigger bonuses to the directors and senior managers, whilst leaving their customers with mountains of debt that they, the customers, would have to repay to the banks by way of even higher utility bills. Strangely enough, the banks were amongst the shareholders who would also benefit from the higher dividends. The directors and managers didn't mind that the islands, rivers and beaches were polluted. This was because the directors and senior managers always took their holidays in the Caribbean, as did the directors and senior managers of the banks. Even though the countries of the Caribbean were much poorer than the island of Sodom, their beaches were always sparkling and clean. Tessa was working hard. Her job was to move tanker loads of raw sewage, third-class carriages, as Percy jokingly called them, from the utilities to the beaches and rivers so that their load could be dumped at minimal cost and maximum profit. "Straight from the bottom to the bottom line," said Percy cheekily. Tessa was pulling the tankers and simultaneously pulling on a large Cuban cigar. James was disgusted. "It's disgusting," he said. "It shouldn't be allowed." "Do you think Mr. Rishi will do something to stop it?" asked Thomas. "That depends," said James. "Whether there's anything in it for him," said Henry. "Or his family," Percy added. Edward, who followed these things closely, agreed. "Allegedly," said Edward. Thomas queried Edward's use of the word allegedly. This was partly because he didn't know why Edward had used it, but mainly because he didn't know what it meant. Edward explained that allegedly is a word used to convey that something is claimed to be the case or to have taken place, although there's no proof that it has or did. He said it's also a word you have to use if you don't want to get sued. "Allegedly," said Edward, "everything Mr. Rishi does, be it tax cuts, trade deals, contracts, are for the benefit of either himself, his wife, or her family." Thomas was surprised, and surprisingly he knew what surprise meant, so he went with it. "Surely that's illegal or immoral." "Illegal, immoral, or it makes you fat," said Percy cheekily. "Whilst we're on the subject of illegals," said Nigel. The engines shouted them down in unison. Unfortunately, I can't tell you what they shouted, but I can tell you that the second word was off.